Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schwab Coaching. My name is Cameron May. I'm a Senior Manager of Trading and Derivatives Education here at Schwab, and this is Getting Started with Thinkorswim. And I'm really excited about this. And we're going to be talking through what I call 5 really cool chart tools for stock users or for stock traders that you may not be aware of that are right there on Thinkorswim. I want you to pay attention as we go through these 5 tools. I think there are going to be some real bangers for you out there for users of charts. There are going to be some revelations here. So count how many of these tools you were familiar with and let me know at the end of the presentation how many you saw that were new and how many you already maybe recognized. But in any case, we're going to be going through these 5 tools and explaining where they're found and how they might be used. Should be a great discussion. Before we can get to any of that, though, let me first of all say hello to everybody who's already chatting out there in YouTube. Great to see Ricebird and Villa. Chuck, David, Eva, everybody else, Jackson, hello. Everybody, thanks for joining us week after week. We always do appreciate your attendance, your contributions to these discussions. If you're here for the very first time, I want to welcome you as well. And if you're watching on the YouTube archive, after the presentation has been concluded, we'll enjoy that presentation, but be aware that you're invited to join us in the live discussion. If you'd like to be here as a member of our live audience, this is a Wednesday webcast series, kicks off promptly 2 Eastern time. We would love to have you here as a live audience member. And as a treat for our live audience members, my very good friend Brent Moore is going to be hanging out in the chats, addressing any questions that I can't get to just during the natural flow of the presentation. Thanks for having my back there, Brent. And Brent and I would also like to issue an invitation to everybody listening live or on the archive. If you have an account on X, you should be following your favorite Schwab presenters there on X. You can find Brent there at Brent Moore CS. You can find me on X at Cameron May CS. But it's the best place to connect with us in between these live streams. And if you reply to one of my posts, I try to reply right back to you. All right. But let's get into this discussion of 5 cool stock chart tools that you didn't even know were right there on Thinkorswim. So as we do this, of course, there are risk considerations we need to bear in mind. These disclosures are important, so do keep them top of mind. All corporate or issuer names and market data shown are for illustrative purposes only and are not a recommendation, offer to sell, or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security. Schwab does not recommend the use of technical analysis as a sole means of investment research, and investing involves risk, including loss of principal, and for some products and strategies, loss of more than your initial investment. All right. So simple agenda for today. I want to go through these 5 tools one at a time. We're going to be using a demonstration account on the live platform because 3 of the 5, the last 3 are only available on the live platform, not available on paper money. So let's go right to that demonstration account. Let's start off with cool tool number 1. As I said, I think they're going to be, for chartists at least, what I would call bangers in here, things that our traders are going to enjoy exploring the potential of. And this first one actually occurred to me because I was teaching a webcast very recently, just this week. Somebody mentioned that Apple, and so Apple is going to be sort of our common thread symbol for each of these tools that we're exploring today. But somebody said, hey, on September 9th, they have their big event. I think they're calling this the awe-dropping event. Well, hopefully I'm sure that the executives at Apple want to inspire awe with this event. But the question was, what has been the impact on price of these September events on Apple in the past? And there's actually an interesting tool that might provide some really good insight into that right there on the charts. So let's use the seasonality charts. Now, how many of you, even by mentioning the name, how many of you actively have used the seasonality chart before or even aware of it? So if you didn't know about this, if we sounds good. All right, so if you'll notice, it's really quick navigation to access this tool. We go to Style, we go to Chart Mode, and we're going to switch that to Seasonality. And as I do that, I'm presented with now a chart that contains two lines. So let me tell you what these two lines are. We have our green line here. This is really just showing us how Apple has performed right up to today. So if you look at the time axis down at the bottom, you can see it starts right at the start of the year, January 1st. And then our green line is taking us out to August 27th. That's the date that's today's date as of the moment of this recording. Then we also have this red line for comparison purposes. Now, this is conceptually a seasonality chart, but by default, I got to let you know this. By default, this is just showing us last year. So really, this is just showing us year to date for Apple right now, but also last year's charts. If we wanted to compare that, let me pop up here to our grid charts. Let's bring up a second chart. This is just sort of to make a point. This isn't so that we can, have a deeper understanding of the chart, but I think it helps to really embed the construction of the chart here. Let me switch up my style here. Let's just load up a nice clean line chart. And if we zoom in from the end of 2023 to the end of 2024, let me just capture that time frame for Apple. You'll see, wait, if I look at the red up here on my seasonality chart, and I look at last year's chart of Apple, it's just a line chart, it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, that's right. So that might be useful for our trader to just see. We could go back and look at last year, maybe look at September, and we can see that it was drifting down. But really the question was, how has September done over a series of years? So let's make a modification here. Let me remove my grid chart for just a moment. And I'm going to switch up the time frame of my seasonality chart. Now, as long as I've loaded the chart type to a seasonality chart, if I go up to my time frames, let's switch this to like a 20-year, one-day chart. We're specifically telling us keep that year-to-date performance on our chart, but this red line is now how Apple has done on average over the last 20 years. Interesting. However, it's compressed down at the bottom of the chart, so it's not really useful. This is where I think a lot of our chart users are going to find potential value in this indicator. I just need to change the y-axis or the vertical axis of the chart so I can get a better view of this 20-year average performance. And to do that, I'm going to come up here and switch this from an automatically generated y-axis. Let's switch this to a manual, which is going to allow us to highlight. You know that highlight function where you can click and drag and highlights a period of time? Well, you can also highlight price levels if we've selected this manual function up here. So I'm going to come down to the seasonality chart below and click and drag over that. So it's really just going to zoom in on just that. We already know what Apple's doing so far this year. It's going to remove that from the chart, and it's going to zoom in just on this average seasonality chart. So with all that set up, I would actually be quite surprised if a lot of you have used this function before. That's why I wanted to describe this as a cool tool. Not a lot of you are going to be familiar with. But if we look at September at this point, you'll notice there's kind of a peak in Apple in September, and then it sells off through October, but this is no longer last year. It's not like a weekly chart of the last 20 years. Instead, this is an average performance of that September period for the last 20 years. That's significantly different. So if I were to zoom in on just this feature, let me come down here, make sure I'm going to select the channel tool here. We can use drawing tools when we've zoomed in on this, but if I just want to make a note of this time frame, this is telling us as we're peeking over the horizon for Apple, maybe looking at this upcoming event, and we're wondering, well, I wonder how this did on average during September over the last 20 years. I don't have to go back and look at every, let's say, monthly chart and aggregate them for the last 20 years. This is already doing that. So our traders might say, wow, at least for an average over the last 20 years, September into October has been kind of a selling period for Apple. Interestingly, after that, Apple has tended to resume its upward trend. And so maybe for an Apple, a technical trader, they might recognize that as a possible, let's say, entry point. Oh, even you say, oh, that is interesting, right? Now, is this a guarantee that this is exactly what's going to happen in 2025, since this has been the average of what's happened over the last 20 years? Not a guarantee. Nope. But to some who like to observe historical tendencies, they might look at this and say, well, if I'm trying to optimize my entries, it looks like if I were a trader of Apple over the last 20 years at least, maybe getting in at the latter stages of September or the early parts of October might have been a more optimized entry than other times. A very similar thing might be said about earlier in the year. February and March tended not to be strong. However, that second, third week of March, there's tended to be a rally. Tam and Honey, you like that one? Did I say there were going to be some interesting tools here? Okay, so that's it. Nice thing is this webcast, I know that there was a little bit of a setup. It'll take a little bit of practice to get used to loading this one up. And then you'll get stuck and you'll wonder, now, how do I get back to a typical chart? We just come back up to style. We switch our chart mode from a seasonality back to a standard chart. Let's switch it. And by the way, once we set that seasonality chart to a 20-year, the next time I load it, if I were to come back here to our style, and if we were to switch this back to a seasonality, it's going to have that 20-year. It already has our drawings on there if we want to zoom back in again on that. There we go. Pretty nifty. All right, so let's clean that one up. Let's clear that drawing set. I'm actually, while I'm here, going to switch this back to a 1 year. So the next time I come back to the seasonality chart, it'll look more like this. And then let's switch this back to our standard chart. Okay, that's cool tool number one. Let's look at cool tool number two. And in this, we're going to be getting a lot more granular. We're going to be looking at day to day, maybe hour to hour if we're using hourly charts, or week to week if we're using weekly charts. But we're going to be venturing into that field of study known as candlestick patterns. And for some traders, they like to apply their own analysis to a chart, determine whether they're seeing a pattern or not. Or maybe it can be useful to have thinkorswim's software look for patterns in the chart. That can be done. Let's go right up here to patterns. We can actually look for price patterns or for candlestick patterns. I thought for today, let's talk about candlestick patterns. So I want to select which patterns we're looking for. And how about for today's example, let's go to the candlesticks. And how many of you have used this feature before? I'm going to select Harami because it's going to give me a few additional things that I can talk about once we've added this to a chart. You'll see what I'm referring to. But Harami, to some traders, is a potentially important short-term reversal pattern in price, where it might signal that a stock appears to be at an important support level or a resistance level, turning points over a relatively short period of time. And it consists of basically two candlesticks. The relationship of those two candlesticks is what tells the trader that there may be a reversal underway. Now, if you're not familiar with the term Harami, Japanese word, I don't speak Japanese, but I've had it explained to me that it means pregnant. That's fine. But basically, it's a large body candle with a small body candle that seems to fit inside it. But what we're going to tell the system now is to go look on this chart of Apple and make a little arrow indicating anywhere there was a bullish Harami or a bearish Harami. Now, before we apply that, actually, we could click apply. You're not even able to see them because my pop-up window is obscuring the arrows that are now appearing on the chart. But I did want to talk about what this search is now looking for. And the hint is right here in the numbers, 23 and 0.3. If I go over to the gear, you can see there's our 20, our 3, and our 0.3. You can see that 20 is the length. If I want a description of what exactly this refers to, this is the number of candles used to calculate the average body height. So with a Harami, we're typically looking for a larger than normal body. And then we'll be looking for a smaller than normal body. Well, what is large and And how's that calculated? Well, this is going to look over the last 20 candles. This is a daily chart. So it's going to look over the last 20 days, see what the average range is, high to low, and then it's going to look for larger candles than that as its first input. Then it's going to have something called the trend setup. The trend is just looking to see, well, have recent candles been going up or down? Have the highs been going higher? Have the lows been going higher? Or have they been coming downward? To establish a trend to see if there is a trend to be reversed by the identification of a candle. Now, these are customizable if you want to use different time frames. But then finally, we have what's known as the body factor. So first of all, we look for a tall candle. Now, we're looking for a small candle, or at least a candle with a small body. So what is that body factor? So if we click on the little question, it says, the factor used when checking if a candle is short. A candle is considered short if its body height is lower than the average multiplied by this factor. In other words, we're going to look for average candle size over the last 20 days. And then we're going to look for, if we get a big candle, is the next candle a small candle, not more than 30%, the body of that candle, not more than 30% the size of an average candle. Does that make sense? I hope it does. In any case, all of that adds up to the identification of a potential Harami candle. Each one of these are customizable for those that like to customize their searches and their indicators. And by default, the system will be looking for bearish Haramis and bullish Haramis. You'll see that the bearish Haramis are going to be blue arrows. Bullish are going to be orange. You might think, why blue and why orange? Well, just because they stand out. Those colors will contrast with kind of typical red and green or red and white candles, right? But let's click OK. Let's click Apply, and let's look at our chart. And now we'll see that there are some arrows, not very many. Ishihasha 8 says, the position of the baby, I'm lost. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Harami candles, I'll explain them to you. Let's use one of these as an example. Let me zoom in on this one. So this blue arrow is now pointing at what's known as a Harami candlestick pattern. And that pattern includes these two candles. It's a two candle pattern that is intended to identify a potential short-term reversal in price. And you can see when these two appeared, in this case at least, prices went down for the next day or two. This is not long-term reversals, it's short-term stuff. But in any case, first thing the system does is to make sure that prices were going up leading into the appearance of these two candles. Next, it's looking for a big candle. This is this white candle, right? Then it looks for a small candle. It looks like it could, like the body of that candle could fit inside the body of the larger candle. So if you think of a small body inside a larger body, you can see where this Japanese term harami or pregnant might come into play. Yeah. But the concept here is we had bullish momentum with a big move to the upside. Looked like it was just going to continue, and then kind of not much of a next day. When that enthusiasm boils out of the stock, maybe that signals that the stock is likely to return downward to some extent. That is the logic of a Harami. Does that make sense? So the system just went and looked for Haramis and identified them on the chart. And this allows the trader to just very quickly get some repetition with these. And if one happens to appear on the chart, it'll make a little candle, make a little arrow pointing at it. Hey, Cameron, there's a Harami on this chart you're looking at. Or if we've selected some other pattern that we prefer to look for, we can choose a whole bunch of patterns. All right. But there we go. So in this case, it looks like we had a bearish Harami here. There's another one here and another one here. And you can see in 2 out of 3, it did a pretty good job of calling short-term highs. This one, stock actually went up a little bit further before it went down. No technical approach is going to be perfect. But it also identified a bullish Harami. What's a bullish Harami? Well, that's where price is moving down, and then we get a big red down day, and then a small white day that would fit inside the red, And that's typically seen as a bullish Harami. In this case, it didn't do a great job of calling precisely the bottom, but did a pretty good job of being in that range of the bottom. So yeah, good point of how no technical approach is going to be perfect. But there we go. So with that, I wanted to introduce that tool. We can hide these patterns if we've sort of cluttered up our chart without having to go in and delete them from the tool. We can just check the box here where it says show patterns. You can just check that, uncheck it as a quick way. Or if we go back to select patterns, we can just delete them so we don't have to do that anymore. Okay. Ishihasha says you're on your phone. What date range are you looking at? 1 year. These are 1 year with daily candles applied. That's cool. Chart tool number 2. How am I doing? How many of these were you familiar with already? Am I 0 for 2? Have I got 2 for 2? That'd be interesting to learn. Our next tool is one of those that's it might be hiding right. Oh yeah. Ishihasha says, yeah, it might be too small to see those little tiny arrows on a phone. Yep, I can understand that. Your display screen is probably that big. You might want to come back and rewatch the archive for this session on a laptop or with a bigger screen later. 2 for 2? Nice. All right. Our third tool is kind of hiding right out there in the open. And it's something called the chart describer. Before I go to it, how many of you are familiar with the chart describer? Quick yes or no. Just let me know. The chart describer is a little technical scan function by Thinkorswim that looks through some of the most popular technical indicators as defined by the amount of traffic they get from Thinkorswim users, looks through those indicators. And when we're looking at a stock, it calls out some of those indicators just by default, right? So I access this. Let me take it off again so you can see it. It's just this right up here, a little window with an I icon, the letter I. And as I hover over that, you'll see this is called the chart describer. So if I click on that, it literally describes this chart in technical language. Hey, Cameron, the standard deviation channel over a 21 period standard deviation channel has an upper value of 257.06, a lower value of 214.43. It gives us some volume data, and it's calling attention to the 9-period simple moving average. Okay, that's nice, but it would be nice to pair that information up with those studies. So you'll notice right over here, if you want to see these studies that Thinkorswim, that its algorithm seems to identify as kind of being pertinent at the moment, I can click Add Studies to the chart, and I can see, oh, now I see what's going on. So here's our 9-period simple moving average. Price has just risen above that. For some technicians, that might be interesting. But price is also approaching the upper value of a 21-period standard deviation. If I'm not interested in that, I don't have to use this tool. But if I were to, let's say, switch up our time frame, for example, let me remove these studies. So I can remove the tool by clicking on the little X here. I can remove the studies by going up to Studies and just select Remove All Studies. Let's just do a nice clean chart here. Villager says you don't know how to set the indicators. You don't have to. We can just click on Add Studies to the chart. All right. But if we switch up our time frame, that will switch up which studies might be highlighted, because maybe the 9-period is not doing anything particularly important, let's say on a weekly chart, or apparently particularly important. Let's switch up our time frame and let's see what the chart describer has to say about a weekly chart for Apple. Well, it says the 20-day exponential moving average recently crossed above the 50-day exponential moving average. Standard deviation periods, and it gives a description of those standard deviations. The 9-period simple moving average is 219.04. Great. So I can see if the 9-period is at 219.04. Right now we're at 230.51, $10 off that. On a weekly basis, it might be some distance above We can load those studies up here if I click on that, but you've already seen that. Now, another thing that some traders might do, just to quickly navigate through, maybe they link this to their watch list. So they might see what Thinkorswim's algorithm is highlighting on stocks in the watch list. We just want to make sure that, that our charts are linked. If we intend to do this, we can just bring up our personal watch list. Maybe we have a personal list of bullish stocks. That one was obviously a very small one. Typically in this webcast, or in this account, these are just demonstration. Let's actually link that to the S&P 500. That's okay. There we go. But if we've linked this, we can just click on stocks, and it will load up those charts, and it might call attention to some other indicator. Ooh, with NVIDIA, relative, the RSI is at 70.83. So that's above, that's up in that overbought territory. So it's just describing, let's see. Mark says, my Thinkorswim view does not have the box you clicked on. Yes, Mark. So when I launched this webcast, I said we're going to be going through 5 cool tools. The first 2 are available on Paper Money. The last 3 are not. So I'm glad you pointed that out, Mark. It allows me to restate. This tool is only on Thinkorswim Desktop Live. Yeah. So if you're trying to follow along on Paper Money, it's not there. You'll go to click on it and say, Cameron, your tool's broken. It's not there. No, it's there. It's just on Live. All right. But yeah, it depends on the stock. The Thinkorswim algorithm might see something else that might be typically technically interesting. So with Apple, RSI might not have been in an interesting zone. With NVIDIA, it appears to be overbought. Cool. Anyway, let's close that up. Let's close up our indicator. Let's switch up our time frame. Just sort of set things back to default. So that's cool tool number 3. How am I doing? Over 3, 3 for 3, 2 for 3. Let's move on to cool tool number 4. And this has to do with drawing tools. So Soy says, is this an AI summary? It's an algorithmic summary. It's been there. It predates AI. It was introduced in 2019. Evie, you like that? I'm going to go back to Apple for our remaining examples. Anyway, but chart users commonly like to use drawing tools so that they can record their own momentary thoughts on a chart. And maybe they make a plan for what they might want to do in relationship to those drawings. So for example, let's use one of our drawing tools. How about we use, in this case, it doesn't matter. This is going to apply to a lot of the drawing tools here. But we're going to be generating alerts using our drawing tools. Now this one, I'm going to guess. We got 131 people watching. I'm guessing there are going to be at least a couple dozen that are familiar with this feature. But let's say that our trader is looking at Apple and they notice it looks like there's a short-term high right here, a resistance level. I'm going to draw in a level right there. I can draw that with my trend line. I can draw it with the price level tool to make it perfectly level if I want to. I could do Fibonacci's to draw a horizontal line. Any one of those could be used for this function. But the idea here is once we've drawn a line on a chart, we can right-click, or once we made a drawing on a chart, we can right-click on that and create an alert using that drawing. So if you're doing this on your Paper Money, again, if you make a drawing and you right-click on it and you look in this menu, you say, Cameron, it's not there. Yeah, this feature is only available on the Live platform. But let's create an alert with this drawing, and you'll notice just in this pop-up, it'll say intrabar price. In other words, if it's telling the system, generate an alert if the bar at any time during a trading session, during the time frame of the length of that bar, crosses either above that trend line or below that trend line. Now this one, we're waiting for price to go above it. So let's choose crosses above that trend line. Trend line 1 is the generic name that's already given to it. Maybe our trader has decided to buy the stock breakout. So that'll just be a little reminder that comes with that alert, what that trader was planning to do. We can tell the system how we want to be notified. We want a sound, just a little bling. Hey, Cameron, we just crossed that line. We can send an email. We can send a text message. You'll notice those are grayed out. That's because in this example account, I have not designated an email address for the account. Haven't designated a phone number. It's just for demonstration purposes. But we can create an alert right there from that drawing. Now we can also set a time for this to just expire. You know, if this doesn't break out in the next 4 days or whatever, we could just specify that here. DCW says, does the alert remain if you delete the line from the chart? You know what? Actually, DCW, I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but let's experiment. Let's create that alert. Do I want to? No, I'm just pretty confident it just expires, or it just since it's tied to the line, it just, if we delete it, it goes away. You know what? Let's do it. Let's create that alert. Let's call it a breakout, just to save myself some time. Crossing above that trend line, notifying where the sound is fine. I'll set this to expire just in case I forget to. How about we set this to tomorrow? But August, today's the 27th. I'll just put it on the 28th. This is local time in what we'd call military time here, 4-hour time. But let's just create that. And now we have that alert. And let's delete our line. Right click. Let's remove the drawing. Oh, look at that. Nope. There we go. So we can delete the alert just by clicking on the X DCW and we're done. All right, so that's cool tool number 4, creating alerts using drawings. Now, just to emphasize this, this can also be done with other drawings. So for example, if I used the price level tool, I can right click on that and create an alert with that drawing. Or let's right click this. Let's remove that drawing. And what if I draw a fib? Let's use a Fibonacci extension. So I'm going to choose Fibonacci's, click at the top, move down to the bottom and click again. And in this case, what the tool is going to always do, it doesn't matter whether I draw from the top down, from the bottom up, it's going to look at where price is, and the next line above that becomes the alert line. All right? So I'm going to right click on that. Let's create an alert with that drawing. And you'll notice it says if the interbar price crosses above the 100% line, because the 100% line is the next one above price. If I had drawn it a different way, let's remove this one. Let's say I drew a fib down here. Ooh, we just crossed above the 100. What's the next? We just crossed above the 161.8. What's the next line? If I right click, create an alert with a drawing, it's, ooh, am I that close? Right at the 161.8. Must be splitting hairs on this one. Anyway, yep, it'll look to those Fibonacci lines, and I cross a Fibonacci line. So I'll remove that drawing. Experiment with some of those other tools. Those are not the only drawing tools that allow us to create alerts using the drawing, but you can practice creating those alerts, maybe set expiration times so just in case you forget, you don't get harassed by alerts you no longer have an interest in. That's cool tool number 4. Cool tool number 5, I want to revisit something that I did just a few days ago in another webcast series. And this actually relates to the chart, but it's not on the chart. For some technicians, they have preferred technical signals that if they can just find those signals, that triggers them to trade shares bullishly or bearishly or whatever. But sometimes a specific signal can be a little bit difficult to track down. So in a recent webcast, we talked about a tool that's exclusive to Thinkorswim. It's known as the Market Forecast tool. And I'm going to switch my symbol here to illustrate this one. So let's go to Consolidated Edison. It's an S&P 500 company that has kind of something interesting going on with it regarding the Market Forecast tool. So let's add the Market Forecast. Type in Market Forecast here. Let's add that to our chart. Click Apply and click OK. And what you'll see with Market Forecast, by the way, these blue ovals, I drew those. If you're wondering where those came from, I put them on there. They're just to call attention to a specific behavior on this indicator. Kevin says, is there a place on Thinkorswim to see all the alerts in one place? There certainly is. You can pop up here to the Market Watch and go to alerts right there. Okay. Pardon me. But in any case, with traders who use this Market Forecast tool, if you're not familiar with this tool, it's basically 3 relatively short-term but different time frame stochastic oscillators. They're momentum indicators over different time frames. And a typical user of the Market Forecast tool might look for all 3 of those to reach down below 20. That would be in the oversold range at the same time, meaning that well, at least this is conceptually what they might think, is that if we have momentum over a period of hours bottoming down, momentum over a period of days bottoming out, and momentum over a period of weeks bottoming out all at the same time, boy, maybe there's nowhere for momentum to go but up. That's the concept. Doesn't always work out, but those are our 3 lines here. So when they congregate down below 20 on the same day, we refer to that as a cluster. On the same trading day, or generally within a 24-hour period, there are schools of thought in 2 different camps there. But you can see there are examples of that here on Consolidated Edison throughout the year. And when all 3 of those cluster below a value of 20, sometimes that precedes a significant move to the upside on our stock. Here, it was a little bit early, but moved significantly higher here. Here we got a cluster, price advanced. It doesn't always work. No technical approach always works. But yeah, Villager refers to this as an oversold cluster. Well, that's nice, but it just doesn't happen very often. So it can be useful if, and this is just an example of the type of a technical signal that a trader might be looking for, but Thinkorswim has some very robust search filters or search capabilities to look for these sorts of things. And it's on the Scan tab. I'm going to go do a scan. And by the way, if you want to see this scan, I just reviewed this in a recent webcast. You can actually do a search on our YouTube channel. Just go to our homepage here and look for Market Forecast. And there's that discussion, scanning for the rare Market Forecast cluster trade signal. So I spent 45 minutes discussing this previously. I'm going to do 4 to 5 minutes doing it today. But let's go back to Thinkorswim here and let's scan for this. So let's go to our Scan tab. I'm going to start just with a blank scan. And first of all, I don't really need any of these default stock filters. So I'm just going to close those out by clicking on the X. Next, I'm going to say, let's just look for clusters in S&P 500 companies. So let's scan just in the S&P 500. Now we're going to add 2 study filters, technical studies. Now this is only available on the live platform. So let's choose study here under add filter, and let's add another study filter. So our first filter, Christy says, does Thinkorswim have level 2? It has level 2 in a number of places. Christy, yes, definitely. Anyway, for our first filter, let's look for clusters. So I'm going to choose for my study, let's look at a custom study. And by default, it's going to default to the ADX because it doesn't know which study we want to filter for. Let's delete that and add our own condition. So specifically, we're looking for a study called the market forecast. And that market forecast consists of those three lines: the momentum line, the near-term line, then the intermediate line. You'll see those right here. And I'm just going to run a scan or a filter for a momentum that is less than a value of 20. Let's say we want that within the last 3 days or the last 3 bars. So let's save that. Let's add another condition, same indicator, a study called the market forecast, where the near-term line has a value that is less than 20. I'm going to set that to 3 bars. You'll notice I'm doing this fairly quickly. That's because I did a more in-depth discussion of this just a few days ago. So let's add a final filter, our study called the market forecast, where that intermediate line, our third line, also is less than a value 20. All of these are just to illustrate the really robust scanning capabilities of thinkorswim. Let's add that. There we go. Click OK. There we go. In any case, so here's what we are scanning for. We're scanning for the market forecast where the momentum, the near term, and the intermediate lines are all below 20 within the last 3 days. Now, one other filter that I might want to apply here, a lot of those are going to be low because the stock has been going down and down and down. How about we also add a requirement that we are trading near a high, let's say within 20% of 252-day highs. That's how many days, trading days, are in a calendar year on average. Let's scan. Let's see what we get. All right. So for stocks that are trading within 20% of their yearly highs, there are only, 7 S&P 500 companies that have a cluster within the last 3 days. And look what's right there at the top, Consolidated Edison. There we go. So thinkorswim, as cool tool number 5, has really great scan capabilities. If a trader already knows the sort of technical signal they're interested in finding, if only they could find that signal, experiment with, especially maybe with that custom feature on that scan tab. So I know that was a little bit of heavy lifting in a relatively short period of time. If you want to see that in greater detail, make sure you go to our Trader Talks page and just do a quick search for market forecast. And you'll see that more in-depth discussion I had explaining the indicator, explaining how it might be typically traded, and also spending more time constructing that scan. But guys, we've accomplished what I set out to do today. I wanted to talk us through these 5 cool tools for stock charts that you may not have known are right there on thinkorswim desktop. If you enjoyed this discussion, this is what we do on these Wednesday webcasts. We get acquainted with the tools and features available on thinkorswim desktop. Time for me to let you go, but as I do, I just want to make sure that you are using all of the resources available to you, even those outside of these live stream discussions. So first of all, if you haven't subscribed to our Trader Talks channel just yet, please do that. You can subscribe by going down the lower right-hand corner, click on that subscribe button. It only takes a second. It doesn't cost anything, but our Trader Talks channel is where we house the webcasts that have already been completed. So you can find those right here on the Trader Talks Schwab Coaching webcast page. Go to playlists and you can find playlists of previous discussions, including this one. You can see there are a lot of different webcast series across a range of topics. If we're just getting started with Thinkorswim, actually, if we scroll right on down to the bottom, there's the playlist for my webcast series. Now, another thing that I would suggest you do is that you follow Brent and me on X. You can follow Brent there at Brent Morris CS. You can find me on X at Cameron May CS. But this is where I can post things when the camera isn't on, and I can like ask questions of my followers and get sort of a lot of input regarding developing market conditions. Like, for example, I asked this question recently: which factor do you think drives stocks most through the end of 2025? It's going to be interest rates or earnings or tariffs, something else. A lot of people have replied. I reply right back to them. Got a good discussion going on there, but a great resource there. Everybody, thanks for giving me a thumbs up. That's always appreciated. I'm going to let you go enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you next Wednesday. I'll also look for you on X, but whenever I see you again, until that moment arrives, I want to wish you the very best of luck. Happy trading. Bye-bye.